Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai. Welcome to our extraordinary council meeting for Wednesday the 16th of March 2022. Just to explain a few things, bit of housekeeping. The meeting's being recorded and it'll be live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. Obviously we are in the COVID-19 protection framework, so please follow all those protocols. In terms of health and safety requirements in the chamber, you're well used to that. We are, unlike the event of an emergency, where our exits are, and please report any incident to the administrators. Councillors online, please, and in the chamber, if I could ask you and presenters to give your name before speaking and to use the microphone at all times. We have a number of councillors and officers online, so just want to acknowledge that councillors Barrett, Bowen, Dingwell, Finlay, Johnson, Butt and the Deputy Mayor are online, and a number of officers as well. So councillors, we'll go to our order of business, and we have number one, there's apologies. I haven't received any. Being none, we will move to number two, which is the notification of additional items. And there actually is one which we need to approve before it can come into the pecking order, which is item 7 around consultant for recruitment. And the reason for that urgency is to enable council to start the recruitment of the CE's position immediately. And the reason for the lateness was a deadline for the response from the recruitment organisations was on the day of the publication of the agenda. So I'm happy to move those. If I could have a second. Thank you, Councillor Dennison. Are there any comments before we vote? And sorry, councillors, I should have, and viewers online, we are going to vote by hand. So are there any questions or comments? There being none, we will vote by hand, please. And that is unanimous, thank you. Right, declarations of interest. Again, I don't think anybody has come to me on that, so I'm looking around the room, I'm looking online, there is none. Right, we'll move now to our main order of business, is the presentation of Part 1 Public Committee of Council Recommendations from the 2nd of March 2022 meeting. That's on page 7 of our papers. And I'll give you a moment to just have a look at that. So what these are, councillors, these are the recommendations from the Committee of Council meeting that come into the consultation document. We need to approve these before we can even go to the consultation document. Thank you. I just would give everybody a moment just to double check them. Okay. All right, so Councillor Dennison, you're happy to move those. So that's 1-22, 2-22 and 3-22. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hancock. All right, I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Dennison, do you want to speak to this at all? No, okay. Look, councillors, I will just make a brief comment. As our debate, I'm still feel that we are in a unsustainable position and somewhat of a rates crisis if we continue on. My comments, as some other councillors were before, some of these programs are fantastic if all things were going well, but as we know, just with the government recently cutting fuel tax at the 11th hour, we just need to be mindful of things ourselves and cutting our cloth as well. So I won't be supporting it. I'm sorry, I cannot. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just use my right of reply to express that while we went through the debate and there were some closer calls within it, this is what it is. And now I'm happy for it to go out for the community for consultation and let the community have their say. And if we have a strong viewpoint come through that we need to lower the budget and give some direction on what areas we should concentrate on to reduce that, then we'll have those debates after the submissions, after the hearings, and coming into June to actually set the budget. So this is a draft plan and are very open to hear from the community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, councillor. We'll now, that's the right reply, so we'll now put it to the vote. So what we'll do...
Can I call for a division?
Yeah, sure, we will. We'll just wait for the officer to get to a microphone.
Mr. Mayor and councillors, so this vote is on item 4 of your agenda, page 7, the Part 1 Public Committee of Council recommendations from its 2 March 2022 meeting. Councillor Hancock.
For.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, are we taking all recommendations at once, or are these to be separated out?
No, they're all at once.
Could we separate 222?
Yes, we can. Yep, we can do that.
Thank you.
So if I can come to you now, Hannah, which one are we going to do first?
Let's do 222 first,
Okay.
and then we can do 122 and 322 on our second vote.
Thank you.
Okay, so looking at 222, so that's on page 8 of your papers. Councillor Hancock.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Petrinas. Councillor Barrett.
For.
Councillor Dingwall.
For.
Deputy Mayor Rutherford.
For.
Councillor Bowen.
For.
Councillor Naylor.
For.
Mayor Smith.
4.
Councillor Meehan.
4.
Councillor Butt.
For.
Councillor McCallard.
4.
Councillor Dennison.
4.
Councillor Finlay.
4.
Councillor Harpeter.
4.
Councillor Beattie.
4.
It's unanimous, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
And on 122, which is on page 7 of your papers, and 322, which is on page 8 of that agenda, Councillor Dennison.
4.
Councillor Hancock.
4.
Councillor Meehan.
Against.
Councillor Naylor.
Against.
Councillor Beattie.
4.
Councillor Johnson.
4.
Councillor Dingwall.
4.
Deputy Mayor Rutherford.
4.
Councillor Bowen.
4.
Councillor Harpeter.
Against.
Mayor Smith.
Against.
Councillor Butt.
4.
Councillor Finlay.
Against.
Councillor Petrinas.
Against.
Councillor McCallard.
4.
Councillor Barrett. 10 votes for and 6 votes against, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. All right, councillors, we'll move to our next agenda item. That gets us through to the next one, which is around number 5, the annual budget plan for 2022-23, adopting the consultation document. So online we have our acting CFO, Cameron Mackay, and we have in the chamber Finance Manager Steve Patterson. So Cameron, I think I'm coming to you first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. Good morning to you. Basically, just a couple of brief points from me. So this item basically brings together the accumulation of the decisions that were made in the Committee of Council and prepares the supporting documentation and consultation document for approval for release for the draft annual budget period for the community. As part of the Committee of Council recommendations, there was a recommendation to bring back to you options around the impacts of a lower UAGC and what that would mean to the rating system. We have Steve Patterson in the chamber, Strategy Manager of Finance, who will talk you through the results of that analysis and provide you any further information that you require around the appropriate rating mechanisms for release for this draft period. Thank you.
Steve, would you like to add any further comments?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. I wonder if it's possible to have that slide.
Councillors, that's just coming.
Yeah. Just a couple of quick things. I've got just 2 or 3 slides just to help present the material. So as the Chief Financial Officer said, we've provided a little bit more material in this report, and hopefully that's understandable in terms of the material that's here. It's a complex topic, as you're all aware, and so trying to find a way of presenting it in a form that's simple is sometimes a challenge. Nonetheless, just a brief recap in terms of these, the whole picture, if you like, and a slide or two here will help us do that. The first slide here, we're just remembering that as a result of the revaluation, the proportions of the land value changed quite significantly. And in the first 2 columns of this particular slide, you remember that the residential proportion increased and the commercial proportion, non-residential portion, reduced. And if you look at the this third column, that's got the 21-22 rates, as a result of the previous land value, you'll see that column shows what proportion of the rates were borne by each of those sectors. 62.8%, if you like, from the single unit residential sector. So looking at the 2 most right-hand most columns of that slide, the one in talks about shows what the rates would be, the proportion of the rates if we made no change to the system at all. So that's the, so it would be 67.6% of the rates, up from 62.8% that would be borne by the residential sector, and a reduction consequentially in the non-residential sector. So the material that's before you includes a couple of changes that I'll just mention in a moment, but they reduce again back down the proportion that the residential sector would bear and increase the proportion that the non-residential sector would have. So that's the recommendation we'd made to you is a way of addressing, moderating the impact of the revaluation. So just a further reminder, as part of the revaluation, the values changed in the way in which this graph tries to demonstrate. The previous values are shown in the green, and the new ones in the red, pink, whatever one it is, whatever you're looking at. And so you'll see the way in which those values are spread now. Quite a significant change, as you're aware, with the average one, the thing we call the mythical average residential value, moving from 243,000 up to 468,000. That's nearly 100% increase in the land value. So, as you're all aware, that means that those who have an increase in percentage terms that's greater than that will expect to have an impact on their rates that's greater than the average, and those that would have an increase that's less than that would expect to have a lower level of increase in their rates, and perhaps, in some cases, a reduction. So what we proposed to you and what you had recommending through from the Committee of Council was some changes to the differentials, and this slide is what was presented at that meeting, and that just encapsulates those changes. It increases slightly the residential surcharge that would be charged on some of the rural and semi-serviced areas, reduces the surcharge on multi-unit residential, and increases the surcharge on the non-residential or the commercial property. So that's an inherent part of this proposal to enable some moderation. The second component of it was adjusting the uniform charge. So this table repeats some of what was on the first slide, which talks about the proportion of the land value that was borne by each of the sectors, just the two main ones, the residential, the single unit residential, and the non-residential. And the proportion of the rates, it says in the third column there, 21-22. Actually, that's entitled slightly incorrectly. Let me just double check. No, that's correct, the percentage. It's only prepared a few moments ago. I'm just reminding myself to make sure it was right. The third column in from the right is saying that proportionately just over 77 million of the rates comes from the residential sector this year, and about 31 million from the non-residential sector. And under this new budget for next year, that would increase to just over 90 million coming from the residential sector, and it would reduce to 27.7 million from the commercial sector if we made no changes to the rating system. The change that's incorporated in these documents would see that moderated, so that 86.9 million would come from the single unit residential sector and 30.7 million from the non-residential sector. Still slightly less than what was collected from that sector in the current year, or is being collected in the current year, but significantly more than what would be the case if there was no proposal for moderation. So I guess just let me remind myself, yes, apart from the timetable ahead, that's all I was going to show. Just a reminder before I go off the slide pack of where we're off to after this. We're going through the public engagement phase, the hearings, and approving the budget at the end of June. So in the
Yeah, I just
report,
wondered if we could
in the
have
report
questions
itself,
on the UAGC at this point, if, rather than
uh,
moving on?
Sorry, we'll wait till the end. We're just about through, councillor.
yeah, yes. So in the report itself, I've got some of that information that was shown on the slides, presented in a slightly different way. I've shown for you what the actual rate would be in 2.8 on page 13 of the order paper, what the rates would be at various levels of land value, using the various scenarios that you asked that I report back to you on. You'll see that the land, in individual terms, the land, the actual rate that ends up being charged to a single unit residential property is not markedly different from one scenario to the other. So if you take the average, you'll see at what's proposed, the average would be 3161. And it would reduce slightly by about $29 if you took that down to 200. So, as I mentioned at the last meeting, it's a balancing act. The balance is about what's fair to all of the sectors, and we know that there are a significant number of properties that are going to have significant increases no matter which of these options. We talked at the committee meeting about some being over $1,000. And there are a bit over 400 properties in that category, residential properties. And the nature of those sorts of properties are ones in the main where the land value, the land itself is a reasonably significantly sized section capable of subdivision. And so, being aware of the market, you would know that those ones are the ones where the value's increased the most. And so in various parts of town you'll find those properties. Quite a few in the Awapuni area which are quite significantly sized. Some in the area around the hospital up into North Street, all those sorts of areas. Wherever you can envisage seeing sections that are at least, well, when you say large these days, large is not super large sometimes, but over 1,000 square metres, perhaps even 900 square metres, they're capable of subdivision. And so they've seen a significant rise in the land value, well above the 100% that was the average. So it's those properties which perhaps in some cases may not have been very highly rated in the past by comparison with others, but they will experience this increase. And so there are obviously going to be lots of people that are concerned about that, and we're aware of that and conscious of it. But in the nature of what this system is, it has a 3-yearly reset of the base. This is the year where that reset happens, and so I guess we've brought forward what we think are the best options for you to consider, the most appropriate answers to for now, and they're influenced a little bit by the total amount of the rates that you're seeking, but the biggest part of the change is brought about by the impact of the revaluation, to be honest. And so I guess that's the best I can present to you at the moment, and if you've got any questions, I'll try and answer them.
Thank you. Anything extra from you, Cameron, before we go to questions?
No, I think Steve has covered most things. I think the only thing, just to reiterate, I think the graph that showed the move in land values and how it's gone from a less pointy graph in the current setting to a more spread land value graph in the proposed land values, I think that highlights the issue that we're trying to deal with. And within a sector, a residential sector itself, we are limited in tools that we have to be able to temper that spread within a sector. So I think Steve's covered how he has used those tools to you, and I guess happy for you to ask any questions.
Thank you, Cameron. We have a few. I'll go online first to Councillor Johnson, then Councillor Dennis, and then Councillor Barrett. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Steve and Cameron. I have got a couple of areas of questions. The first one is about the table in our paper in 2.8, where we've got general rate down the side and then revised differentials on general rate across the top. I presume all of those figures assume no rates increase, so they're directly comparable. Is that correct?
Sorry, you know what type of increase?
I assume that all of the figures in that table don't take into account the 8.3% proposed rate increase. They're just so that we can compare the effects of changing the UAGC and the differential. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. They do include the 8.3%.
Right.
So they are the rate that would be charged in the scenario that we've got in front of us with the 8.3.
Right. So in that case then, is it a fair interpretation that a single residential unit with a land value of less than 700,000 would, under the scenario that we're proposing to consult on, actually have a rates decrease?
Those under 700,000, did you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
No. A rate decrease from where? In relation to what?
In relation to where they would have been if we weren't changing the differential and the UAGC.
I think I can jump
Yeah,
in.
yes, if you're, the comparison you're making was with the far right column, presumably.
No, the comparison I'm making, I'm trying to clarify the effect of the moderating influences that we're putting on, or that we're proposing to put on.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is, if we go with the UAGC at 300, and if we take, say, a land value of 650,000, your table would say that the rates would be 3,933, and that is a small decrease on what they would have been if we hadn't changed it compared to the old differentials, and it's even an increase compared to the left-hand column as well.
The column on the far right,
Yep,
is the one that says what it would have been had we made no changes to the
that's right.
differentials on the right. So all of the one, so you can see the comparison there. So whatever you're comparing, if you compare to the one on the far right, that's saying what it would be, and the comparison is with that. So,
Okay. So basically the changes that we're proposing have the effect of reducing the total rates from what they would have been for properties of 700,000, not properties, land values of 700,000 and below.
even higher than that, actually. In fact, all of the residential properties are lower than what they would have been because of the effect of the changes to the differentials.
Okay, so the left-hand column then, where it says it says UAGC 500.
That's assuming the changed differentials.
Yeah, so that's where only the differential changes. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you for clarifying that. And then my other question is around the table in 2.3, where you've noted that the changes that we proposed last week have reduced the proposed rates increase to 8.3%, and that corresponds with our policy maximum. But we're still using the Burl Local Government Cost Index of 2.4%. And I know I asked this a couple of weeks ago, but I'm going to ask it again. An inflation index of 2.4% seems to me to be vastly underdone, given all that we know about general inflation and in particular the specific increase in costs for the sorts of things that council has to spend money on. So are you still comfortable that this is a sensible budget to include only 2.4% as an inflation index?
I think from my perspective, the 2.4 is what it is. That's reflecting what we've said in the policy is the tool that we use to measure against in terms of what's the policy. In terms of the question about whether that's if we've built in the Burl adjustments to the rates and if that's adequate to do what we need to do. Well, I think at the committee meeting we did say that there was an increasing element of risk about that, of not being able to deliver within that budget. But that's something that we'll review as the draft is put into the final form, and the council may need to consider some changes perhaps in the light of that, but in reducing what can be done or whatever the expectations about what can be done. But at the moment, our recommendation was to not change the underlying budget assumption, and that we'll need to address it, as I said, as we move forward. But in the light of what you say, there are certainly increasing risks that there'll be areas where we cannot deliver within the proposals that we've made.
So when you're talking about looking at adjusting it, is that prior to the sign-off of the budget in June?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Mr Mayor, I'm okay. Those clarified my questions. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Steve, for the update. Just wanted to really make sure I'd understood and clarified in the slides that you've presented there, in particular that last slide. Interested in that dollar for dollar comparison between last year and this year. So is it the case, in fact, that if we look at the non-residential side, the actual dollar for dollar shows that the non-residential in FY23 would be paying 400,000 less total rates than it did last year?
In total, yes, approximately that. These are very high level figures, but approximately that, yes.
Thank you. And on the single unit residential side, that there will be an additional 9.6 million in rates?
Yes.
Is it fair to think about those sort of in a net sum of 10 million then?
I didn't pick up a couple of words there. Is it fair to...
Sorry, is it, just thinking about how those play together, is it kind of fair to see those two numbers together as sort of net shift of $10 million, the 9.6 plus the 0.4?
Well, I think there's a significant shift, there's no doubt about that, and that's the reason why we're trying to look to moderate the impact of that. And so the shift itself, I wouldn't see as, well, it's not all a shift, I guess, because the shift is, there's a growth in the budget's higher, there's more being collected. So the comparison would need to be, I'm just trying to think of a better way to express what you're trying to ask. I think certainly what we can say is there's more being paid by the residential sector than the commercial sector in terms of the changes in the amount that the council's seeking from rates this year. In fact, just about all, you'd say all of what we're looking to do in the end is coming from the residential sector, if it was as harsh as that, brought about by the changes in the value distribution because of the changed values.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Steve. That's understood. Second question and final question that I had was just around in the consultation document. I think it's page 13 of the CD, which is page 28 of the agenda, and it kind of headlines there with the $200 drop in the UAGC. But then there's those other fixed charges that come in underneath, and it looks to me like the kind of net effect there is actually closer to a minus 100 rather than a minus 200 when we think about those other specific categories of fixed charge. And just wondered if you could give us some perspective around viewing those as an entirety, like that there's a net about $120 shift versus teasing out or specifically highlighting the UAGC at minus 200.
Well, I think from my perspective on page 29, it does give the whole picture in terms of the inclusive, it includes both the uniform annual general charge and the other fixed charges. And the page that you're referring to, we think we're understating that is...
He's talking about page 29, Steve, around
yes, I
fixed
appreciate
charges.
that.
And if you do the add up, I think what the councillor's trying to allude to, there is a bit of a missing other charges. Is that what you're talking about, councillor?
There aren't any other charges other than the ones that I mentioned there in terms of fixed charges. So which other page are you trying to refer to, Councillor Barrett?
Sorry, just doing a bit of navigation on my end. Yeah, no, it is page 28 where it starts headline fixed charges. I guess what I'm trying to really tease out, I think, as the mayor said as well, is that, do we consider the minus 200 of the UAGC kind of in isolation, or do we actually need to acknowledge that because some of those other fixed charges have gone up, that the net effect there is rather closer to a minus 100 rather than a minus 200?
I'm not sure whether we need to say anything more than what we've got, to be honest, but because what we're saying is, I think overall that we're showing quite clearly what the details are of each of those fixed charges, including the uniform charge, so you can get a picture of the whole thing there.
Steve, if I could just interrupt, sorry. Would it? I think the councillors, I had some sympathy for his question. If you're a layperson and you're looking at this, it doesn't actually add up. Is it worth putting a comment that there's differentials, there's plus differentials, because if you look at column in the green, which is the proposed charges going forward in 22-23, and you look at the old charges, it actually looks like it's less. But it just needs some sort of comment. Is that where you're going, councillor?
Yeah, thanks. I'll try to keep it as a question, but I guess my question would be, could we put a sum at the bottom of that just sums up the 21-22 column and sums up the 22-23 column, so that we could actually see, in terms of total dollars out of my pocket, what does it mean? Because otherwise people are left kind of looking at the different lines and trying to work out what it all means.
I guess we can have a look at that page and do that as part of a minor amendment if we need to try and make that clearer. What we are trying to say at the top there is that the rates are made up of two parts, a fixed part and a variable part that's based on the land value, and this part on this page it's talked about as the fixed part. So we can total it, but we can have a look and see if there's a comment we can make.
Your comment just actually summed it up really, around fixed charge, but actually there's another part which is the differential.
So that is in that first line there of that page.
Well, maybe it needs to be
highlighted. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I'll leave it there. Leave it for comment. Thank you.
Thanks, councillor. Councillor Naylor.
My questions are related to the consultation document and supporting information. Is now the right time to ask them? The first one, there's a program in this year's budget around the Civic and Cultural Precinct, and in a paper that went to the Planning and Strategy Committee last week, talked about that program being a 3-year program, including the 22-23 year as the third year. There hasn't been a program put in front of elected members to consider adding in to the draft annual budget, and I'm just wondering if that is required and at what point elected members would need to consider the inclusion of that.
Get David Murphy to.
So, sorry, hold on, what is happening here? I thought I was cheering. Have you finished, councillor?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah, okay. So, is Mr Murphy answering it?
Yes, Mr Murphy is going to answer that question.
Thank you for your question, councillor. There's a council workshop scheduled for May. We hope that that workshop would have been earlier in the year, but due to the COVID impact on that program, it has been delayed. So in May, there'll be a full briefing / workshop on that program. At that point in time, I guess if the council would like to continue with the final stage of the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan, a decision will need to be made about whether to include a specific budget or fund the final stage of the project through existing budgets.
Okay, thanks for that. My next question relates to the supporting information that was provided to us 2 weeks ago. And on page 15, there was a page that was what's changed from what we proposed in the 10-year plan. And I see that that page doesn't appear to have been included in the supporting information document that we've been provided for this meeting. And I'm just wondering if people in the community are wanting information about what's changed and specifics around that, including budgeted amounts, where would they find that? And also, why has that page perhaps been deleted from the supporting information?
Yes. In the end, councillors, I made the call about deleting it. We basically ran out of time to make it happen and to get it sorted in a way that was going to be there. We think that there's probably enough information provided in the detailed documents with the supporting information on the activity by activity pages about the changes to the programs. And so if someone particularly wants to know a bit more detail, there is material obviously online from the meetings that we've had that we could point them to if we needed to. But it would have been my preference to try to get that information, and we just didn't have the time to make that happen, and so we haven't got it in there this time round.
Okay, just one final question, if that's all right, Mr Mayor. In the consultation document, I gave verbal feedback 2 weeks ago, as well as written feedback, that it would be good to actually have dollar amounts in those items that are listed on page 7 and 8. That hasn't been included in the changes that have been made, and I'm just wondering if there's a reason for that.
Yes, again, councillor, at the time I made the call that we wouldn't, because I thought there were going to be 1 or 2 of those items that were going to be difficult to explain. Yesterday I had a go at trying to make that work, and we have drafted up a version that would include those figures. So from my perspective, we could cope with doing that and make that change if that was the wish of the council. And
one final question, if it was the wish of the council to include those as dollar amounts, would that require an amendment to the recommendation, or would that be considered minor amendments?
Can I help here? I think to make it crystal clear, maybe an amendment.
Thank you.
And then otherwise, council officers will think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And it just needs to be probably crystal clear.
Okay, I'll
Thank you.
include that as an amendment. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any more questions of the officers? Nothing online. Thank you. So, councillors, we have on page 9 the 3 recommendations. We'll get those up on screen. Thank you. Thank you, Cameron, online, and thank you, Steve, for the work you've done there. And it's been challenging, but I appreciate the effort that's gone into look at different options for the council. Okay, annual budget plan 2022-23, adopting supporting information consultation document. Council resolves that the council adopt the supporting information attachment 1 as the material relied upon to prepare the consultation document for 2022-23 annual budget plan. Number 2, that the council adopt the consultation document attachment 2 for the 2022-23 annual budget plan. And number 3, that the Mayor and Chief Executive be delegated authority to make minor amendments to the consultation document prior to publication. Now, we've got an amendment, I think. Okay, no, sorry, I was happy to move it. So I'm happy to second this. Okay, so Councillor Dennison, do you want to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe at this point this leaves us with little choice but to support it, actually. I know that there was members that voted against the minutes and the recommendations from the Committee of Council, but actually this needs to be supported to go out for consultation, in my view. The community will tell us where we're at, and I believe times are going to be a little bit more challenging, and there will be a call to lower the rates. And we'll hear that through the submissions and through the hearings and debate that in the June final debate. I believe now if we start to have reservations about putting this out for consultation, we'll put delay and maybe even impact the length of time we can consult with our community if we start to hold it up at this point. So I think, I've just expressed the view, I think this is fair and reasonable to put out for consultation knowing our community are awaiting this. Thank you.
Councillors, anybody else online? No? Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. Just a couple areas that I do want to comment on. Firstly is around the overall budget, and really do appreciate the work the officers put into giving us quite an objective and thorough analysis going into this, and certainly endorse what Councillor Dennison just said. We've done a huge amount of work to get to this point. We need to keep working forward. Overall, with me, the budget does sit reasonably well. I think it is very much the tempering of ambition, but it actually properly reflects the challenging times that we're in and our need to respond to the growth pressures, price pressures, etc., that we are facing, while continuing to meet the community needs. So I do support the overall size of the budget as fair and reasonable basis for consultation, given the needs and opportunities faced by the community. The second point I wanted to comment on is around how we're proposing to share out that rates burden. And I do need to say that I'm not comfortable with how it's being proposed to share out. When we see, relative to last year, that the total rates take from residential, single unit residential is going to go up by 9.6 million, while the commercial rates will go down by 400,000. That's a net $10 million loading towards residential rates. And I'm not sure that the wider community will actually be on board with that, especially when the UAGC could be used further to help ameliorate some of the effects, especially on the lower ends of the property market. I understand that it's within the parameters of the rating system and that it's driven by the crazy inflation around house prices, and that officers have done some work to try to smooth the worst effects. But when I see that $10 million loading, I really struggle to feel like we've used the levers to best effect, and would hope, because I'm sure, again, as Councillor Dennis has said, we will get feedback around affordability. I hope that we keep in mind options that are available to us in terms of seeing how that rates burden is shared out throughout the community. Finally, and just briefly, around the most important stage of the work, which is the consultation, really looking forward to hearing from the community on this. Hope we get a lot of informative submissions. Really want to thank the officers. I think they've taken on board a lot of what we've asked for in that improvement to the consultation document. It's looking really good. And really, it does spell out that a lot has changed since a year ago, especially in terms of capital delivery, and we need to know how that actually sits with the community, and we need to know that in some detail as well as the overall picture. So, I hope we do get a really good raft of submissions coming in, and really looking forward to those next steps and appreciate again all the work that officers have done to bring us the relevant information in a very suitable manner. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to speak to all of these recommendations just briefly. I'll just start with the second recommendation to adopt the consultation document. I will be moving an amendment for that. I absolutely think this year it's probably more important than many years that we hear from our community about what we're proposing, particularly when 6 people around the table are not willing to support what we're proposing. That's a significant message to our community that we actually need some guidance when the people in this room are not united about what it is we're proposing. Yes, it's a draft and we can change it. However, the efforts that have been made to date to try and bring that increase down have not been largely successful, and I think as elected members we're going to have to look at making some difficult choices, and we're going to really need to listen to our community on this so that what we arrive on in May is actually reflective of what we think our community actually can cope with at the moment. I think I really appreciate the work that officers have put into providing really good information for us, and in particular there's been a lot of work go into whether we can, the distribution of the rates and whether we can moderate the effect of the valuations. And look, I know many of us have looked at that in detail, and I think what I would say about that, there's no perfect tool to moderate the effects of the revaluations. Whichever way you look at it, if we're going to ask our community for $9 million more, there's a large amount of people that are going to have to contribute to paying that additional $9 million that we're adding on from this year's rates. I believe the best tool available to us in a year that is affected by valuations is actually how much we increase the rates overall. And that's the tool that to date we have not utilised, as we've not come to a consensus about how to rein in that additional spending. We've got to acknowledge that the long-term plan was an unaffordable and unfundable plan. Yet, in year 2 of that LTP, we've not moderated the effect of that. What we've done is added to it. So we've got a few million more that we've added to the operational expenses that weren't included in the year 2 of our LTP. That's really disappointing to me. Just moving to the amendment that I'd like to propose for the second recommendation, I think for us to engage meaningfully with our community, we need to provide specific information. I think the officers indicated that some work's already been done to be able to provide those amounts on page 7 and 8, but I'll move an amendment just to make it crystal clear, and I understand Councillor Barrett will support that, to ensure that the dollar amounts are included alongside items on pages 7 and 8. Shall I leave it there to deal with that amendment? Okay, I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, thank you. So you've completed your comments on the whole. Yeah, thank you. All right. Is it?
Sorry. Only I've completed my comments on the amendment, but just to finalise in terms of the overall, I won't be supporting recommendation 1 just because of the level of dissatisfaction I have with the level of rates increase that is incorporated in that overall plan. But happy to support recommendation 2 because I think it's vitally important that we actually do consult our community and hear from our community on this.
Thank you. Now, is there anybody else that wants to speak to the amendment? Okay. Nobody else would wish to speak to the amendment because we need to deal with that first, and I'll come back to other comments.
So we're moving to add the words with dollar amounts. We're not moving the whole sentence, just to add the words with dollar amounts included alongside.
Okay, just want to make it crystal clear to everybody. This amendment here is, whoops, it's gone, is really, all we're adding in there is the dollar amounts included alongside the items on page 7 and 8. It's quite, yeah, thank you, that's better. So all we're adding is the red bit. It's pretty crystal clear. So there being no further comments to that, just write a reply on that, councillor, if you're right. Good, thank you. So what we'll do is we will do this with a show of hands. I'll just wait for the screen to come up. Okay, we have our colleagues online now. So we'll, all those in favour of the amendment? Against? That is unanimous, thank you. Right, we'll now go back to the substantive, and I'll go back to any other comments. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am happy to support the substantive, and I just want to make a couple of comments. Councillors around the table aren't united and never have been when we come to annual budgets. There's all sorts of individual programs that we vote for and against, depending on where we come from and what communities we're representing. However, if we vote against this, we're going to spend about 4 or 5 days in line-by-line litigation, and for what outcome, I don't know. So we can put this out to consultation, and I would like our ratepayers and our residents to come back to us, and if they don't like it, then we can start going line by line and then taking notice of what they wish. So I'm comfortable to support it. The second comment I'd just like to make is the difference between that 10 million between the commercial and the residential. What councillors may not be aware of is that we've had substantial residential growth in the city. So, for example, where you get a street just around the corner from me, like Lead Street, there's been massive infill in that street, where there's been, I think, probably 9 houses just on that street been built. So where the rates may have been on average $2,500 for that piece of land, that has now significantly gone up because you've now got 2 sections, so we'll be getting rates on both those sections. So when you look at the infill totally across Palmerston North, I would expect to see a massive rates increase for residential. So I'm comfortable where that sits, and overall we haven't impacted on the balance of residential. So I just want to make that clear, as that's why we are seeing such an increase in residential. And if you just look at the subdivision around the city, again, just where I live, 46 new houses in less than 3 years. So when you look at the 3-year growth in residential, I think that's where you'll see the impact with the residential against the commercial. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I'll just make a couple of quick comments before I pass back to Councillor Dennison for right a reply. Look, thank you, councillors. Appreciate all your comments. Look, even though I didn't support the changes that were signalled earlier, Councillor Dennison's right. We now need to let this go and go to the community. I do think it's unsustainable, but our community will tell us if that's the case. I just want to acknowledge the work of the officers. The challenges and balance, certainly around spreading around the revaluations, has been quite significant. And we're a city that has seen significant growth, as Councillor Beattie just alluded to. And the integrity of the rating system needs to be held up. So acknowledge Steve especially, and the other Cameron and the other officers that have been in behind doing that work, and especially the examples on pages 30 and 31, which give the average person an understanding of what it was, what it could be, and the proposed changes that we are looking at or suggesting. With that integrity in mind, I think it would be unwise to be pushing more onto the business and commercial community who have seen substantial decreases. So, as Councillor Beattie alluded to, there's been significant growth in the residential side, and you would expect it unless you're artificially trying to push it onto another sector. And I think that would bring the integrity of the system into risk and somewhat unwise. So again, thank you to the officers for that. My comments around the unaffordability are well made, and I'm not going to repeat that. And it was the majority view of council that this goes forward, so I'm going to respect that decision, and I'm happy to support it and let it go to the community. So Councillor Dennison, a right of reply.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think there's some really good comments made. A couple of things I'll just address. One is the unaffordability. I think ultimately the city will tell us if this is about right or not, and they'll have a fair opportunity to submit their views. The comment around Audit New Zealand's comment about our long-term plan being unaffordable, that was acknowledged that the wastewater commitments that we had to incorporate in our long-term planning of up to 500 million was a big impact on why that comment came about. And now knowing that the three waters are going into independent entities, that'll transfer the asset, the management of, and the associated debt across, which will change our, as a city, financial position moving forward. And not making comment whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing, that has a decision out of our hands. As far as getting to this point, there was a democratic process of going through, debating issues that we put up, and I thought we did that at length and quite robustly, and everyone has had their say, and this is the end result from us, from elected members, to go out for feedback. And I think Councillor Beattie did make a really good point around a growing city. There's a larger number of residential properties that will share this impact of this investment. And I think the Mayor made the equally good point around not burdening business always. Business over this period have found it challenging under the COVID framework in most cases. And so therefore, I think where we're positioning, I sit quite comfortably, I think that is quite fair. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think they summarise.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, we have the substantives up there. I'm not going to read them out again. I'm going to take them as a pack of 3 recommendations. I'm not going to do a division. I'm going to do it with a show of hands. So we have the 3 recommendations there on the screen. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you, that's unanimous. All right, thank you, councillors. Now, before we break, we do need to move into part 2, and I'll look to move the meeting into part 2, public excluded, seconded by Councillor Harpiter. There being no comments, we will vote on that with a show of hands, please. Thank you, that's unanimous. Now the meeting's adjourned till after I get instructions from the infrastructure